This lecture is going to go over a little bit about African culture, society. We're stepping back from the politics, and I just want to point out beforehand that the stuff that I'll say in this lecture, I'm sort of more pointed at the smaller parts of African society, not the empires, not the not the big cities, but more of sort of the countryside, more of the rural areas. We're taking a brief step back from the elites and what is Mansa Musa doing, and looking more at the sort of the regular folks. So the regular folks in Africa would again, way back in the day, would be combined into what we call lineage groups. So really, this is just like extended families, but like sort of like way extended families, like not just your cousin, not just yeah, you and your cousin's family, and yeah, your cousin's kids, but even a little bit further spread out than that. People that you're not quite sure, you call them a cousin, but they're not quite your cousin, but like you had some sort of great grandfather in common. That was sort of how towns and groups were structured. Your extended family, your very extended family, would be your, sort of your tribe, not that word, but your lineage group. They would be the people that you would look out for. They would look after you. You guys would be, together. If somebody messed with one of you, you would all come to their defense, and if someone fell in hard times, you would all help them out. Before Christianity or Islam came to Africa, there were still religions there. They were, many of them. They were sort of smaller in that, fewer people practiced them, and there were a couple characteristics that sort of loosely unite them, and I go over them, there and there. So you'd have fellas like this would go through sort of certain rituals, like religious rituals, to try and tell the future. They would try and sort of communicate with the spirits to to tell you what was going to happen. I think you guys are probably familiar with like modern day like fortune tellers and stuff like that. These guys were sort of taken more seriously than that, right? These guys were sort of respected, again, sort of religious figures, and they would work with even the rulers, like the politicians. They work with a lot of people. They were, people had faith, not necessarily in them. It's not like the people worshipped these guys. It was that these guys had a sort of special connection with the spirits, or so was the belief. And in truth, I mean, regardless of sort of your belief in these things, these guys would have an ability to advise the rulers in important ways. If you really think about it, someone like this who everyone in the community would come to him to ask advice on important issues, advice on what they should do, advice on where they should go. They A lot of people in the community are talking to them, so they know a lot of things. So if somebody comes to them, right, and says like, oh, I really like, Jane, but I don't know if I should ask her to marry me, what should I do? He'd be like, oh, let me think about it. And then Jane comes in, and Jane's like, oh, I don't know, I really like Tom, but I don't know if he's going to say marry me. What should I do? I don't know. And he could say, let me think about it. I have a spell for this. And then he could, talk to Tom, I forget what his name was, and be like, the spirits tell me that Jane, yeah, you should ask her to marry you. The point is, these guys sort of had access to a lot of information because a lot of people would come to them for things. So, sometimes they would be able to, know things either because other people had told them, or just because they were wise. They were sort of older and wiser people in the community. That's kind of how you got that job in the first place. So it was just sort of a way for people to, become elevated and get into positions of power in the community. Also, again, we're talking about the religions that existed before Christianity and Islam come into Africa and spread and become the two largest religions in the continent as they are today. Before that, ancestors were often very important in the sort of native African religions, the ancient ones. People would sort of pray to and honor their ancestors. That is to say, right, the people, their great grandparents who are no longer alive. Like there was an idea that those people could help you, right? That like, granddad could help you with a problem. So they were an important aspect of the ancient African religions. Another important aspect of African religions was dance. They used, again, we're talking about ancient Africa here, like way back. These communities would use dance and music in the same way we do, right, for fun. They certainly did that, but there were also sometimes religious purposes for dancing. It was also important, right? It wasn't just, oh yeah, just frivolous, of fun. There were sort of important dances that could be done with traditions and stuff like that, for certain ceremonies, and the sort of rhythmic patterns that they developed came then to America through the slave trade, because these are the cultures from which are coming the slaves into America a little bit later on. Slaves were taken from these communities sort of like during wars. There'd be like a war between these guys and these guys, and the winners would take some of the people that they beat as slaves, sell them on to Europeans, and then they would come to America. Point is, these traditions, right? These the sort of the rhythms, the music, the culture of these areas start to come over here. And they change over time, of course, because it's been hundreds upon hundreds of years. But historians take a direct line from the music, and you can see the musical instruments over there. The music that's developed way back in Africa, all the way through the slave trade, coming to America, and then changing in America, developing, growing up or whatever, and eventually becoming sort of a couple different genres of music. And you can see them over there, right? Rock and roll and jazz and stuff like that. Sort of the grandparents of those genres of music, if you go all the way back, is probably those guys right over there. And then, last but not least, their music, along with stories, were used to pass on history. If you go way back into super way back ancient Africa, you don't have history books. You don't have written language. It gets there, but not for a bit. So before that, storytelling, music along with just actual storytelling were that was how a community's history was passed down. That was how you learned about how did we get here in this town, or what were the great accomplishments of our great grandparents. That kind of stuff was done through oral tradition, not through written language. Again, at first. All right.